So welcome everyone to our final for this year's NGO Committee on the Family meetings. We are really excited to have Dr. Brenna Hassinger-Das as our final speaker for today's event. I'm blanking out. The event is on, sorry, my screen just went blank all of a sudden, of course. On Playful Learning Landscapes is going to be a focus on ways to meaningfully integrate kind of public spaces for the use of children and families that it probably wasn't originally intended for, and kind of redefining space. I'm going to do the full introduction in a few minutes though, because we first wanted to start with some NGO Committee on the Family New York business that I'm going to turn over to Ryan, and then I'll give the full intro for our speaker as well as the event.
So thank you for that, Ben. As far as business is concerned, it's an update rather. This is our last meeting of the academic year. And in years past, the last meeting of the academic year has always been our business meeting, right? We've combined a presentation together with elections for new board members, et cetera. Because of the pandemic and because of how crazy this last year has been, we did not actually end up holding the regular elections that we should have held last year even. And so we've been discussing this together with the executive committee. The way that our committee has functioned in the past, the co-chairs have served 2 terms back to back, generally speaking. And so as an executive committee, we made the decision that we're just going to grandfather in and serve a second term back to back. So that would mean that Ben and I would have 1 more year left as the co-chairs, having served 3 years already in this capacity. For your information then, the slate is Ryan and Ben, myself and Ben Freer as the co-chairs, Lynn Walsh as the recording secretary, Siobhan Heekin-Kennedy as the corresponding secretary, Vinny Santoro will continue as the treasurer, with Florence Denmark, Marcia Barlow, and Marilyn Kanelski as members at large, with Florence Denmark operating also in an ex officio capacity, well, Lynn Walsh too for that matter, as the immediate current past presidents of, or past co-chairs of the committee. We will graciously and thankfully step down at the end of this next term, and we'll work on, Lynn says no, and we'll work on, establishing our regular election pattern for next spring. The pandemic has caused a lot of chaos in a lot of circles, and I don't know of any organization's bylaws that say, in cases of a global pandemic, this is what you do. So this is what we've decided to do. We wanted to just inform all of the members of the committee of that decision and of what's going on here. I recall back in the day I lived in the Philippines, and there was the president of the Philippines at the time was made the president after the former president stepped down. So it'd be like the vice president becoming the president. And they have term limits in the Philippines. And she says, well, because I'm the president now, I'm not going to run for another term because I don't want to violate any of those term limits, right? And then she decided to run for another term, and it was this big to-do. I promise you that Ben and I will not do that. That's all I have to say about that. But I want to thank everybody for your patience, for your attending our virtual events over this last year. I think that we'll be able to meet in person this coming year, and I'm excited for that in some capacity or another. Maybe not everybody in person, maybe we'll be doing hybrid. The executive committee will be holding an offsite in the next couple of weeks to kind of map out and do a roadmap for our coming year. But I wanted to thank all the membership for all the support that you've shown us. throughout the pandemic. It's been lovely to be able to connect with you virtually, if not in person. And with that, I turn the time back over to Ben.
Great, thank you, Ryan, well said. And so this turns us to our event, which is on playful learning landscapes. And you can see in the invitation you had for today's event, the full concept note. I won't go through all of that, but I am happy to welcome Dr. Hassinger-Das as our presenter and speaker today, and expert. Her research examines children's play and learning in home and school and community contexts, particularly for children experiencing poverty. She is particularly interested in investigating the effects of both play and digital media on caregiver-child interactions and child learning. She's committed to translating her research for use by the public through community-based research projects, as well as blog posts and commentaries featured in outlets such as The Conversation and the Huffington Post, as well as additional local outlets. And really excited to hear about her both research, but also practical application of that research into communities that really need it the most. As we've talked about in this group before in our NGO, it's wonderful to hear from researchers about what they've learned and how to do it. It's a whole other thing to hear about what they've done, but then also how they actually applied it to the real world, and how we can think of ways that we would apply our own passion and interest into our communities and those communities around the world. So thank you so much, Dr. Hassinger-Das, for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, I'm just going to get my slides going here. All right, so as Ben mentioned, I'm Brenna Hassinger-Das. I'm an assistant professor at Pace University, and I want to thank Florence, Denmark, for hooking me up with your committee so that I might be able to talk with you all today. I'm also a science advisor for the Playful Learning Landscapes Action Network, and it's a bit in that capacity that I'm going to be talking with you all today about playful learning landscapes. At the bottom here, you can see our website, which is playfullearninglandscapes.fun. Of course, it's more fun than .com. And you can go there and see even more images and things than what I'm going to show you today. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit at first about what is playful learning before I get into telling you a little bit more about what plan is, in fact. So what is playful learning, and what does playful learning look like in community settings? So from our perspective, when we talk about playful learning, we're really talking about this idea of play or playing toward a specific learning goal. And from a theoretical standpoint, playful learning has different components. For example, free play, or what you typically would think of when you think about play. So something that's fun and engaging and really child-directed is a part of playful learning. But so is what we call guided play, which has some adult scaffolding going on, either in the form of adult kind of like co-playing with kids, or an adult helping to set up a planned play environment with like specific toys or activities that might be directing towards a learning goal. And then finally, the other piece that's a part of playful learning are games. And games are, we see games as having the ability to take the, fun and engaging nature of the game and piggybacking learning on top of it, which actually helps kids and adults as well learn. So research from the science of learning shows us that these three areas, playful learning, guided play, and games, are all effective for helping kids learn. And so they're all part of this idea of playful learning. And all of these aspects show up in playful learning landscapes installations. So why those kinds of activities work, these playful learning activities, is because they are built on these 5 principles of how kids, I say kids here, but it's really how human beings learn best. We know that people learn best in meaningful context. This means that when we're able to connect a new content to a previous experience that a child has had, or previous knowledge that they already know, if we can make those connections, it's a good context for learning. The second one is joyful, which is of course a big part of play. We really don't have play unless it's fun and encourages joy, so that's important. Number 3 is that the context is socially interactive. So we have some kind of social interaction, whether it's with a peer, it's with an adult, a caregiver, or it's with an educator, as long as it's with someone else. And then there's actually, you know, we can debate the idea of socially interactive, because people are actually working now on more designing tech and things that are kind of socially interactive within themselves, that try to mimic the human social interaction. But for what we've been doing so far for playful learning landscapes, it really is other people that we're talking about in this context. The fourth one is that they're actively engaging. So what that means is that it's like minds on. So you can't really be passive in the experience. You have to be, you know, active and engaged and a participant, not just kind of sitting and absorbing information. You have to be actively involved. And then the fifth one is that it's iterative. So what I mean by this is that experiences build off of each other. And you'll hear when I go through a case study with you about plan, you'll hear about how we iterate, in that we get feedback from our community partners, and then we make changes and adjust things based on what we hear. And that's how we kind of see this iterative piece, that you're able to change and build and grow an experience based on what you learn in the past. And then you just keeps going and going and going from there. So these 5 principles really underlie our idea about why playful learning is, you know, a successful way of addressing child learning outcomes. So to give you a couple more examples, this figure here shows you, okay, what if we take play and we transform it into play plus a learning goal? So for example, you know, there's a climbing pole on the playground. But if we wanted to attach a learning goal to that, we could make hatch marks that encourage kids to talk about how high they climb when they go up the pole, and actually have those, you know, line up with actual units of measurement, so that we can talk about how many feet or inches or something that the child is climbing. The second one is actually coming from the case study I'm going to tell you about in a little bit, which is that there's, you know, a playground located near a bus stop. But what if we then transform that bus stop with puzzles and games that build impulse control and spatial skills? And that's actually a project called Urban Thinkscape that I'm going to use for our case study. And then the final example would be, you know, a children's library that has a lot of toys lying around that are maybe not overly like related to each other, connected, but they've got a lot of toys there. But what if we took the same library and we changed it, and we put in, like you see this little boy is climbing through this cubby hole, and actually what happens is there's seating that is removed from the cubby holes that look like tangram blocks that you can then fit the blocks back into the hole, and it's kind of like a puzzle, and it builds spatial skills. And also in installing, I'll show you a bigger picture of this later, but there's an alphabet climbing wall that focuses on literacy skills in the background. And this is another example from a real project that we did in 3 libraries within the Free Library of Philadelphia system. So this is taking what we might see as play that happens every day, and then just, you know, infusing it with some kind of learning goal that is based in research that we know from psychology and education about activities that have been shown to actually help kids, you know, develop specific skills or learning outcomes. So within plan, we have a set of design principles that we use. And so I'll give you a little history about plan. So plan now is a 501c3 organization where we have a director, and I work as a science advisor, and we kind of consult out to various organizations and projects and talk to them about, you know, sharing. If you go on our website, we have a playbook that we designed with folks in Philadelphia that's about how to create experiences in different cities and how to apply them to your own context. But plan really began as several researchers together working with local communities, particularly in Philadelphia, and in conjunction with the Brookings Institution, to figure out how we can transform everyday places and spaces, like bus stops or pediatric waiting rooms or hair salons, where people have to go and wait and spend time, and where kids often are waiting and spending time, into places where we could foster learning and engagement between caregivers and kids, because we know that in Western countries, kids only spend about 20% of their waking time in schools. So that other time they're at home, they're in community settings, etc. So how do we address those, that other time? And we focused in particular on these community settings. So through this work, where we have evolved into Plan as an organization, we have come up with some design principles from working on a lot of different projects. And that's what these 4 are that I'm going to share with you now. So one is that robust community engagement benefits everyone. So through Plan, we're very engaged and interested in working closely with communities from the very beginning of projects. So partnering with a community at the beginning of a project, and then working throughout the project with a community, including hiring people from communities to work on the project, particularly as like data collectors or project ambassadors, and getting that iterative feedback from community members, like through focus groups or meetings with local registered community organizations at their monthly meetings, etc., to get feedback on like pretty much every aspect of a project. The second principle is that these playful learning designs and installations should spark interaction between children and caregivers. So one of the things that can somewhat be a struggle, and I'll mention this later when I talk about urban thinkscape, is that when we do some naturalistic observation, which is one of the ways we collect data on these projects, is just kind of observing how people use them sort of pre and post, and then in control spaces versus a space that has a design. We're very interested in child learning outcomes, but those are of course harder to get in a shorter term span. So what we really spend a lot of time looking at is, how do these installations change the way that kids and their caregivers, or like kids with other kids, interact? And how do they talk to each other? What kind of language do they use? Are they using the kind of language that the installations foster? So if we have an installation that's supposed to get people using spatial skills, like the tangram blocks in the cubby hole at the library, do kids use spatial words when they play with that? And that's where we found success. We find that yes, people do use the targeted language that we would expect them to use based on what the installations are targeting. And people just talk and interact more when the installations are there versus when there's nothing there that encourages caregiver-child interaction, which is, that's a first step on our goal to understanding the impacts of playful learning landscapes. The third one is making sure that you do identify your learning goals clearly when you put in playful learning installation. So thinking about, what is the specific goal that goes along with this? Is it spatial skills? You want to see an increase in spatial language? Is it literacy? It's one of our installations focuses on storytelling, like narrative skills. So does it foster narrative skills, and how are you going to measure that? And then number 4, that an iterative process leads to better outcomes. This is something we've really found to be true, in that, with the various projects that we check in with the community members who are working with us and community leaders who are partnering with us at various points throughout the process, to make sure that everybody's on the same page, that we're getting feedback, that we are making changes that community members want to see. So they are, an integral part of the project. They're not just, we want to make it very clear that we don't just kind of like swoop in and try to, make changes in a neighborhood. We are really committed to working closely with people and organizations that are in a community, and having communities come to us and say, like, we want to do a project in our neighborhood. Can you partner with us? And, yes. And, how can we do that? How can we help you do this the way that you want to do this? What kind of data do you want to collect? What are you interested in seeing changes in? So that iterative process is really important to our work. So I want to walk you through a particular case study, because I think this is probably the best way to help you understand what it looks like from start to finish with a planned project. So this is Urban Thinkscape. this is a bus stop and sort of adjacent lot in the Belmont neighborhood, which is in West Philadelphia. And Urban Thinkscape began in 2015 and it was installed in 2017. Urban Thinkscape, well, so you'll hear a little bit more through the process, but Urban Thinkscape still exists. It's actually not in the same exact location, but through our community partner has now moved to a more permanent location in the same neighborhood, just like a street or two over. So it is still there, it is in good shape. And I'm gonna show you some pictures and tell you about our process. So this graphic that you see here at the top is really how we kind of describe our engagement process. So we've got engage, plan, create, approve, build, and evolve. Those are sort of the stages that we go through with different projects. So I'm going to walk you through the stages for this particular project. Well, the first one is engage. So at the start of this project, which was funded by the William Penn Foundation, they had said, you know, the Promise Zone area, which was it's in the general West Philly area. The Promise Zone designation, you know, they thought that this would be a good area to do a project in. So we ended up meeting with several leaders of registered community organizations from that area of West Philadelphia. And we went into the meeting and said, you know, what do you want to see happening for kids and families in your community? And one of the things we heard was, you know, having safe places where kids can play, you know, when they're not in school is something that folks were interested in. So we introduced them to this rough concept of Urban Thinkscape. I don't think it was even called Urban Thinkscape at that time, but it was an idea of this playful learning space that would be at a everyday spot, like a bus stop. At this point, it wasn't at a bus stop. It could have been anywhere that people were interested in. And so we, you know, answered questions and we got some feedback about that. And then we had a conversation, you know, we kind of left that meeting. We came back for another meeting where, you know, we had kind of fleshed this idea out a little bit more based on their feedback. We talked that through with them. We asked some ideas about where installations might be placed. So this involved like having big maps printed out and put on a table that were of, you know, the Promise Zone designated area. And we sat there with the community leaders, and they had, you know, pens and Sharpies and would like circle lots or corners or wherever they would say, you know, there's an open green space here. It's right next to the trolley line. I think that would be a good spot. Or, you know, I think you should target this particular part of the street because, you know, it gets a lot of foot traffic, etc. So we had this map that had all these areas sort of highlighted on it. And then we pursued different outlets, you know, to figure out then how are we going to make this work. And so what we really did was we ended up choosing this bus stop and adjacent lot that people had alerted us to. And that's how we partnered with the Belmont Alliance Civic Association, because this lot and bus stop were in Belmont. So they are the RCO for that region. And Betty Ferguson is their founder and CEO. And she became our primary community partner. So through her, she and I went and met with the local church that actually owned this small triangular lot that you'll see in a picture that was adjacent to the bus stop. So she and I went together, we met with them. They ended up giving us a lease for just a free lease of that land, because they weren't actually really doing anything with it. And they were excited about the idea of, you know, putting this kind of installation on that spot. So we worked together to secure the use of the land. And her organization had already been caretaking that spot. Actually, there were some like rose bushes and there's a big mural behind the wall there, and you'll see that in the pictures. So once we had the location, then it was time to work with our architect on designs that could fit in the location. We also got feedback from the community leaders on these design ideas, and they provided some of their own ideas as well about things that they were looking for. So that was sort of the initial phase of the project. Next thing that happens is we move into the planning phase. So during this phase, we convened focus groups of community members. So before we met with the community leaders from the registered community organizations, now we're meeting with community members. So we gave participants $30 gift, $20 Visa gift cards to participate. And so we had kids, some kids and adults that participated in these focus groups. We asked similar questions that we asked the community leaders about what they want to see happening in their community. We introduced the concept of urban thinkscape that we talked about with the community leaders already. And then we asked for feedback on location and design. So things that we got from the community leaders, we brought to these community members and asked them, you know, do you like this location? Do you have other ideas? What do you think about some of these prototype designs that have been created? Do you like these? What ideas do you have to change them? Community members had great feedback for us. Things about, you know, so there was one design that they were really adamant about. They felt like it wasn't as accessible as it could possibly be. So they wanted to make some changes so that folks with disabilities, you know, might be able to use it more effectively. And here you can see actually pictures of what the spot used to look like. So you can see it's kind of an odd shape. It's like a triangle. And then there's an intersection right at the end. And you can see the mural in the background. And then the picture all the way to the right, if you look way over, there's a bench that was sitting there. That was where people would wait for the bus stop. It's right next to the lot. So this is what it looked like pre-installation. All right. So the next stage was create. And so here you can see two pictures of Urban Thinkscape when it was finished. So you can see there's still that whole wall over there where you see the dowel rods, those are puzzles. On the other side, we put in more extensive seating. Seating goes down like that whole side over there for the bus stop. You can see we put this decking. And so before, the lot was actually like sloped like this. So we changed the grading so that it was flat. And there is an entryway for a wheelchair. So to make the decking handicap accessible. And we also installed, you can see them here on the poles, those are solar lights. Before there was no lighting on the location. So really just changed, you know, the way that the space was laid out and put in some of these playful learning experiences. So you can see the puzzle wall. So there's 4 different puzzles. The community members chose the images for the puzzles. So Martin Luther King Jr. actually led a freedom march from this spot, I think in 1963. So there's a bust of MLK Jr. in the middle of the intersection. Across the street, there's a big mural of him. So they chose an image of him for one of the puzzles. One of them says Belmont, and you like spin the dowels and you make it spell the word. Another one is, it says Route 30 Lancaster Highway, because that's what Lancaster Avenue is in the street that runs by it. And then the other side is a picture of Lucian Blackwell, who was I believe he was a state senator for Pennsylvania. He used to be a city council person from that district in Philadelphia. So they chose those images, and you can see there's like some little feet. It looks like little feet. Those are called jumping feet. It's like a hopscotch style game that fosters executive function skills. And then you can see the in the lower left, that's Hidden Figures. It's this giant metalwork sculpture that has images hidden in it. And when the sun shines through it, it puts shadows on the ground. And you can also just look up into it and try to look for the pictures. There's like fruits and other things that are hidden in there as well. So there's 4 installations that are at Urban Thinkscape. You can't see the one over to the left. That's the stories installation, where you basically, it has little icons and a little bit of description asking you to move from icons to tell a story. It's kind of like this game called Rory's Story Cubes, which I don't know if anyone's ever played, but it's like you roll it, you get a picture, you have to start a story based on that. Next person rolls, they get a different image, then they have to add to the story, and it kind of goes on from there. And it was like a similar idea to that. So then the next stage is approval. Oh, and this is one of the icons. You can see it down here. The boy is kicking the ball, and the images for the icons were taken from a program called Board Maker, which is actually, it has communication icons that are used a lot by children with autism and other kids who might be nonverbal, and it's a communication tool. So these are like standardized images that can be recognized by a lot of different people. And so the approval stage was probably the least fun stage of this project. And this includes, getting city permits and working with different city entities who were all a part of we had an advisory group that included the community members and leaders, but also had folks from the city and from other organizations that were vested in this kind of process. So we worked on getting approvals to get the site prepared and get it ready, including getting safety inspectors, et cetera, to get it going. And here you can see a picture of some of the folks from one of our community focus groups they're giving some feedback on one of the prototype designs. Okay, then it was time to build. So we partnered, we had, regular fabricators building several of the installations. We also partnered with Public Workshop, which has a program where they train members of the community who are interested in learning skills about how to build things. So they had kids and adults from the community building one of the installations, and you can see them working on it here. And over 100 people from the neighborhood worked on building this installation. So we were really excited about that partnership because it increased the sense of ownership over the project. And then finally, the last stage is evolve, and evaluate is part of evolve. And I'll get to that in a second. But so evolving is really that iterative piece. So how do we take what we learn and make changes and update things? And so one thing we did as a part of this is collecting data. And you can see a screenshot here of one of our data collection forms. So we did naturalistic observation, and this was people who are from the neighborhood who were hired by the project to become data ambassadors and learn how to do surveys and collect observational data. And we use this data to inform, how successful the project is. And then moving forward, we did make some changes, like we changed some of the signage that was there based on some feedback from people. And we also use this moving forward in other projects, what we learned from the data. But what we learned from Urban Thinkscape, and I just have one image for you here. There is actually a paper that if folks are interested, I can happily share that, that was published in the Journal of Cognition and Development in 2020 that details the whole process of what we found at Urban Thinkscape. But what you see here is the post data collection, not the pre. So we did a pre collection that showed Urban Thinkscape versus a control site playground that was in a similar neighborhood. Urban Thinkscape, there really wasn't much conversation going on at pre, because people were just waiting at the bus stop and not really using the other space that was there. But we see afterwards, we saw big gains at Urban Thinkscape. And this was also, we had construction delays. So this was unfortunately in the winter that we were collecting this data, why you see the playground is not so high. But people have to use the bus stop even when it is winter. So people were using Urban Thinkscape and having conversations about things like letter sounds, so literacy. They were talking about spatial language, numerical language, all the kinds of things that we were trying to foster through our designs. So we were really encouraged by this. And then we used what we learned from this project to inform the library project that I told you about already. And you can see in the upper part of the screen here, that is a bigger picture of one of the libraries that was augmented. You can see the climbing wall and the little boy is sitting in the nook. There was also a stage for sociodramatic play. We found similar findings from that project as well. And it was also one of our sort of tangential findings was that the number of children who attended programs at the 3 libraries where we changed the children's space was, like 1,000% higher than children at the control library. So more people were just coming to the library and going to programs when the space was there, which was exciting because that wasn't something we were really even necessarily targeting, but it was kind of an extra effect that happened, that the people were excited to come to the library when they had these spaces versus when they didn't. Another project we've done is working with, we call it supermarket speak, changing supermarkets, putting in signage that encourages caregivers and kids to talk to each other. You can see a picture there where it says like how many rolls are in the basket. That's from a version of this that I worked on with people in Johannesburg in South Africa. We've done this project in Philadelphia. We did a scaling of it in Philadelphia. Too Small to Fail with the Clinton Foundation has also picked up on this project, and they have done it in a number of cities. I worked with them and with United for Brownsville in Brooklyn to do a version of this project that unfortunately got messed up by COVID. But we've done this in a number of places as well and found similar kinds of results on caregiver-child interactions and talk. And then the final project is here. You see it in the corner. It says, when I was little, I loved to play. And this is the play wall. It was influenced by artist Candy Chang, who did a project that it's called like Before I Die, and then you fill in like what you want to do. And so we had talked with her and adapted the idea about this play thing. So we did this in the same community where we did Urban Thinkscape. We partnered with the same organization. We put up 2 different play walls in different places, and had people write their answers, and we would take photos and like record and coded all the answers about like the types of play people were interested in. Then we hosted a community event with our community partner where they had a movie event, and then we also had we had some of the games that especially some of the older people liked, and we had it so that people could teach some of the younger kids how to play some of these games that a lot of people had sort of had nostalgia about. Oh, I loved playing Foursquare or something like that. And so we had an opportunity for different people in the neighborhood to come and play games together as like a community event. So that's another planned project. But some future directions. At the very beginning of the meeting, I was talking to Ben because I actually live in Somerville, New Jersey. And so I am going to be working through Plan, but also hopefully with MOMI, which is a new children's museum that is an emerging children's museum in the Morristown area. And that's something Plan has been working on now, is MOMI would like to do some outdoor installations a la Plan in some locations in the Morristown area. So we'll be working on that. And also we have a number of partnerships in other countries as well. Our main architect is based in Israel and in the UK. And so we've worked with him on a number of projects that are overseas. We have some partners in Mumbai and in Bangalore in India, some partners in Bangladesh. And of course, I mentioned that I've worked with some folks in South Africa as well. So we are always, looking to expand and working with groups in a lot of different areas. But yeah, so that's your little introduction to Playful Learning Landscapes. And I'd love to hear, questions or anything that has come up for anyone while they're hearing this. And yeah, but thank you for having me.
Great, so wonderful. Thank you so much, Brenna. This was really exciting. I have just like a plethora of questions. And so I will use the moderator's first prerogative of asking a question, and then I'll turn it over. I know we've got a number of questions that I've been getting privately. Reminder to all of you, feel free to send questions in the chat. You can also raise your hand or just put a little icon up with the reactions, and I can call on you as well. But to start, I'll cheat a little bit and have 2 questions in one. So first, when you've developed these partnerships, have you been going to kind of public spaces and indicating, oh, this looks like a really great space, or this county or city needs this or could benefit from this, and take the idea to them? Or is it that they have the idea of, we want to do something in a public space, and they come to you kind of with that desire? Because I think often I run into the issue of, and a number of us probably have, where we have this great idea, or what we think is a great idea, and we take it to a county or to a governmental organization, and it's just not something that was on their radar. And so it could be really great, but it's not what they were thinking about. And so it really has a difficulty of communication of, do we have these shared goals? Maybe I'll ask that one. I'll let you answer it, and then I'll ask my follow-up to that question.
Yeah, so it's kind of evolved a little bit, honestly. So Urban Thinkscape is really the first. I mean, the supermarket speak had happened before that, but it was kind of almost like a one-off. Like, it was not a part of this like wider vision at first. So Urban Thinkscape is really the first like planned project. And yeah, that one, we did have an idea, not as specific as like Urban Thinkscape, but just this idea of like doing playful learning in some kind of like everyday space that's like in the public sphere. And we had gone to the funder about this first, because like we knew that this was not happening without money. So we talked to William Penn Foundation. They were interested in this. And then it was like we talked to the folks in the Promise Zone area about if they were interested in participating. But now what happens, because we've done more of these projects and it's more visible, is that we do have communities that come to us and say like, we would like to do this. So I think it really depends on, is it the first project you're doing? It's way more likely that you're going to have to approach someone if you've never done it before and people don't know that you're a resource for this kind of thing. And that's why I think, it's really important to try to make connections with different organizations, like even before you come with an idea, just that folks in the community that you might be interested in working in, and that you can become someone that they see as a resource and might come to you. And like, we learned a lot through Urban Thinkscape. We made mistakes on that project that we hopefully have not made later on as well. But just figuring out how to do this community work and how to really focus on this community-based research aspect as well, and making sure that this worked and that we were able to listen to our community partner. But we've continued to work with that community partner, so we kind of learned from what we did wrong, and we've course corrected and been able to, not that it was just little things that we weren't aware of, two organizations that don't get along, or we go to another organization to ask for some help and it makes another group angry because they don't like that other group. They feel like they don't align with their vision, or something like that. Things that we just walked into that we just didn't know about. And we learned from that. But I do think it really depends on the stage that you're at and what you're trying to do. And also just being open, though, if you're going to go into a community, they might not like the idea, or they might want to change it in some way. And then, we've really learned how to be open to that and open to listening to what different groups are interested in and how we can support the vision that they have for their area.
Great. Well, your answer was so terrific. You actually answered my second question without me even needing to ask it. So one of our attendees asked the question, in regards to families, do you see families interacting in these spaces? A lot of the outcomes that you were reporting were about like specific behaviors, but not about whether is that the child doing the behavior by themselves, or is there actual like co-play with parent and child, or caregiver and child, that's engaging this dynamic experience rather than kind of a static individual play? How do you see that?
Yeah, we collect data on groups. So it's like a dyad at least. You have to have a caregiver, a caregiver and a kid, or it has to be two kids, or it has to be a group in some form, shape or form. That's something that we had learned and changed through the project. Was we first started just looking at caregivers and kids. We got feedback from our community data collectors that they were seeing also a number of just kids there playing. And so they felt like we should capture that also, because we were missing the fact that there was like peer or like older child, younger child interaction. So yeah, all of the data is about interactions. If they're not interacting, then it's not showing up as like what we were interested in, because we track conversational turns. So like the back and forth of conversation, that is also part of the data that we collect. So yeah, what you're seeing is, it shows like child and adult language that's in the context of like having a conversation. And if it's one-sided, that shows up that they're not having the back and forth conversation. We also tracked the amount of interaction. So there's like a scale for how much interaction. And then we also track scales for like physical interaction and other things like that. So yeah, it's really focused on when people are engaging around these things together.
Mm-hmm. Really interesting. Great. I'm curious, around in the space, are there instructions on like suggestions on how to interact with the space? Or is it really a desire to like for the child and the parent to kind of creatively problem solve and like discover what are the ways to interact with this space?
Right. So it has very minimal signage. One of our second, like we redid the signs then and gave some additional guidance, but it's very short. It's just like a little, like a hexagon that's like attached to a pole. Because so our architect, he has like this other set of principles that are about good design. And so it's that one of them is that designs are intuitive, that they don't need a lot of explanation, because we also want to make sure that we can address families who might not speak English, not read English. So we didn't want to make it so that they can't use it because they can't read the directions. So we did have there is some like one sentence suggestion of how you might use it, but it also leaves it open that you could use it in a different way if you wanted to. And that's something that we observed, when we did the observations. We also observed like how people were using it. And a lot of people were using it like the way that it's intended, but sometimes people, kids do more like physical activity there, or they did the puzzle. There's like one puzzle that's kind of like a game, and it's supposed to be like a matching thing. They did like other things because it has different colors and stuff on it too, and they were like creating images like with the colors. And so yeah, we try to leave things like a little open-ended, but can provide some guidance if people want the guidance, it's there.
Interesting. So one of the questions that was in my mind when we started, and that was reinvigorated in me in looking at some of the examples you had of like other projects that you're doing, was in the library. Like the idea of a climbing wall is so exciting and like a whole other approach to what a library can be. I'm intrigued by whether there were individuals in the community who indicated like that is not the space for a climbing wall, and that you got pushback. Because to me, it sounds a wonderful thing. But at the same time, if I were there, trying to grade papers, right, or do something that I wanted quiet, I could imagine there being some pushback on that. Have you had that experience? And if so, how did you deal with it?
Yeah, there was some. So the community engagement for the library, we worked with Studio Ludo, which is a play design firm in Philadelphia, and Smith Memorial Playground and Playhouse. They led the community engagement piece. So we went to the libraries, and we had meetings with people who come there regularly, and like had kids the opportunity to draw their ideal children's library space, and got info for parents about like what they would want in the space. And so one of the things to know about the 3 libraries that this was in is that a lot of kids come there kind of independently after school as a place to like hang out and do homework. They have some homework clubs and things like that at these library branches. But one thing that, folks from the library said was kids have a ton of energy. They have to get their energy out somehow, instead of just like running around and like knocking books over, in the library. How can we put in a place where they can actually like play here? And that's how that came to be. Now, the feedback that we got, some pushback came from like librarians, people who worked in the library, saying like, this is crazy. Why put a climbing wall in the library? Didn't get as much like that from families or community members. Also because in most of these libraries, the children's section was kind of like often it's like own space, so that the adults were like on a different side. So I don't know if they were really like interacting with the space as much. But what we heard then afterwards is that, kids were able to use it to get their energy out, but at the same time, like, the designs are supposed to foster learning as well. So it is like a fun thing they can do, but is also somehow like supporting their like literacy, or the sociodramatic play is like fostering like social skills and things like that. So the library project, that it was a success, and they actually did a project afterwards that Studio Ludo led that was called Play Terrains, and it was basically creating similar kinds of spaces outside the libraries, and those were actually focused on like science knowledge. So like William Penn Foundation funded those. They're really interested in like watershed information in Philadelphia, and so they created these really cool play terrains around like watershed and like water information. Like, kids can learn about like the water cycle and about other things, but it's like in a play space. So there's like play activities where they can learn about these things. Really like taking a children's museum and moving it outside is kind of like what the idea was, and that it's free. It's a space that like anyone can access. So I think what we were really encouraged by in the library project, like I mentioned, is that we saw these like huge increases in the number of kids coming to programs at the library. And that was really exciting, because it was saying to us that like parents and kids were excited to like get the kids out to the library, and they were coming at way, way higher amounts than they were before they went in, and as compared to a library that was similar but didn't get a play space. We didn't see any increases at that library in how many kids were coming to programs. So I think overall, we were able to address some of those concerns. I mean, I think there'll always be concerns that you can't necessarily address, but that on the whole, it was positive.
Great. Well, and I think along those lines, Lynn Walsh just asked the question, about the increase in children visiting libraries, but whether that was also related to whether you saw parents and children interacting within the library for the purpose of reading, right? Which is what we often think of as the library. But I think the idea of the library as a community space is really interesting. I could imagine there'd be a lot of desire for that to also translate to increased reading, right? And literacy. Were you seeing that type of behavior, or were these families really gravitating towards the new shiny thing that had been added to the library?
I think that's a really good question. We didn't actually look at like reading behaviors. We looked at the same kinds of outcomes we looked at for Urban Thinkscape, about conversation and interaction and physical interaction, and like number of conversational turns, and like how engaged they were with each other and with the installations. But I think that would be something interesting to look at is, does it also increase these kind of like other behaviors, like people coming to the library just to like read, or they go and play on the thing and then they read a book later, or, something like that. I think that would be interesting to figure out, because we didn't really, in the way that we collected data, we didn't look at that for this project.
Okay, great. And so Ryan had asked a question about what are some of the lessons that you've learned in the iterative process stage of this, and how has that changed either the way you've structured or the process that you've used in developing subsequent projects?
Yeah. So I think obviously we're learning more and more every project about this importance of iteration. So right now there are I'm on the advisory board for this project, but it's a planned project out in California and Santa Ana, and they are building all kinds of stuff. They're going to do supermarket, they're going to do these kind of urban thinkscape type of things. They're going to do other things. They have an NSF grant to do like a huge community-based project. And something that they've been doing that's taken some of the things we've learned is that they've done these really extensive community meetings and work on like designing things and feedback. So they've had like a series of meetings since like December where they've been like coming back, you know, every month, and they've got community members who they, you know, they support them, they give them, you know, pay them for their time for attending these sessions and everything. And they've been coming back, you know, I think it's like every month with changes that they've made based on their past feedback. They get more feedback. They kind of like, you know, go through this process for several months to really refine the designs and refine like the signage. And like they met with, you know, the community members and they said, you know, we'd really love if you'd put signs in the supermarket about like, you know, kilos to pounds, because they're like, when I immigrated here, you know, I go to the store and I'd be like, I don't know how much cheese to order because I only know kilos. And it's like, how many pounds of cheese do I need? So they designed some signs around, you know, like a little game or something that they can do with their kids about, you know, like conversion, but also gives like information about how to do it. And they got a lot, that's just one example, but they got a lot of feedback, people telling stories about like their own experiences when they go to the store with their children. And then the research team sort of like, you know, coding all this information and coming up with themes and other things that they could use to create signs. And then they'll go to them with the signs. They'll say, well, actually, I don't like that one. I think you should change it to this. And so then they're going to make, you know, they make updates. And so the community engagement process has become even more, you know, well-developed over the course of these various projects, which, you know, I've been really excited to see that. That happened in Brooklyn when I did the supermarket with United for Brownsville as well, meeting with folks even around the data collection itself. Like, what are the folks in Brownsville really interested in, like language about healthy food choices? You know, are people talking about like making healthy food choices? So they wanted to collect that kind of data. So we added, you know, ways to observe and ask people in the surveys about, you know, are you thinking about healthy food? Do they hear certain words that people are saying about making healthy food choices? So even getting the community members involved in like designing the evaluation itself, not just taking part in doing the evaluation, but designing it and figuring out like what data that they want to collect. So we've really been evolving on that at many different levels.
That's really interesting. So I think one of the things that it reminds me of is like it empowers parents, the kilo to pounds. I think so often for individuals who immigrate to a new country, parents are put in this position where they have to rely on their children to navigate the world for them. And it really creates this power difficulty between this relationship. And so it kind of empowers parents to be like, you know, instead of having to ask their child, well, what's a pound? How do I do this? The parent gets to remain in charge and foster this idea of this is how we engage, you know, and order this, rather than having to ask the child to translate or to convert. That's really, really interesting. Well, as is always the case, the time has flown by. We are out of time today, and I want to respect everyone's time, of course. Brenna, so many thanks for you for joining us today, for sharing what it is that you do. It was really engaging and enlightening, really exciting. Thank you. Brenna has shared her email address for those of you who want to be able to contact her afterwards, I assume.
Yes, please feel free to email me if you're interested in anything. Like if you're interested in reading the papers about any of these projects, there is a paper about the library project. There's a paper about Urban Thinkscape. There's a paper about the play wall. And I have a Brookings white paper that's about playful learning landscapes. You can also visit our website as well for more info and to download the playbook.
Well, and I'll kind of wrap up today's event with the kind of heads up for the EC members for our summer retreat. For the last few years, the EC has talked about doing some kind of physical thing that represents our value on families and parent-child interaction. And what a wonderful opportunity this would be for the NGO Committee on the Family New York to be involved in one of these projects that was really about taking research into practice and offering that as an opportunity as well for our membership to be involved in, you know, the building, the engagement, bringing our expertise in any way that would be helpful to you in your projects. So stay tuned. We look forward to talking about ways that we can interact and partner in the future.
That would be amazing. Yep.
Great.
Definitely. That would be awesome.
Perfect. Well, thank you all again for attending today. We really love all of our members, and even those who are not members. But if you are here today and you are not a member, you can visit our website, NGO Family, on Google NGO Family New York, and you'll be able to find our website. Ryan might even be able to drop our website in there in the chat, but if not, you'll be able to find it to become a member. And have a great summer, and we look forward to seeing you all in the fall.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.